Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Start the class. So when I say Fido is a dog, we are dealing with is a relationship. So is a relationship is nothing but a type of relationship. You are mentioning what type of object it is. So when I say Fido is a dog, I am saying that Fido is of type dog. Similarly, when I am saying Bob is a builder, I am saying that Bob is of type builder. Okay. So here we are representing is a relationship. So basically is a relationship is used to uh, decide the type of relationship. So using is a relationship, you can create the instances of the classes, and using those instances of the classes you can access the different methods of the classes. The next concept is the aggregation. So aggregation is nothing but you have got the different parts. So when you refer the different parts, you are not actually representing the entire object. You cannot represent the entire object. So just by mentioning the two legs or four legs, you cannot say that it's a dog or a cat. Okay, so there will be having some characteristics. So combining all these characteristics, you are going to build a object. Okay, so for example, if you consider car, okay, car has a window, it has a wheels, right, it has some other parts, so together we can say that it's a car, but individual parts cannot be referred to as car, because car has a window, even houses will be having a window. Okay, car will be having a door, even house will be having a door. So we cannot identify an object based on their parts. Okay, so together you can identify an object. So that is called as aggregation. So in the above example, Fido is the aggregation of dog object, right? Bob is the aggregation of builder object. The next type of relationship is association. So in association, what happens? You might have seen in the semantic net that there are two ovals. So first oval, in between some arrow and some label is written on the arrow, then another oval. Right? So two ovals are connected, two objects are connected with the help of an arrow. So this arrow and the associated label is known as the association. It tells you how two objects are connected, how two objects are associated with each other. Okay. Say for example, if I say Fido chases Fang, then Fido and Fang are associated with each other using chases relationship. Okay. So if you consider Fido as one object, Fang as another object, both Fido and Fang are connected to each other using the arrow, and on that arrow some label is mentioned, and that label is nothing but the relationship. Okay, that is the association. So in this case, chases is the association. Now next point is why frames are useful. So frames can be used as a data structure by expert systems. So not only expert systems, frames have a unique characteristics. So we will discuss all those characteristics. Okay. So frames can, the important characteristics of frames is that you can convert frame into classes. So there is one-to-one mapping possible from frames to object-oriented programming constructs. So that is the main advantage of using frames. And one more advantage is that frames store information object-wise. So if you take any object, its complete information will be stored at one place. So that is the bottom up approach. So two important points with respect to frames, why frames are useful. One-to-one mapping between frames and object-oriented programming is possible. Okay. Second, a complete information about a particular object is available at one place. The next is inheritance. So you have already studied inheritance in object-oriented programming languages like C++, Java, and even C Sharp. So the main advantage of inheritance is the reusability. Okay, so we don't want to represent the same information at multiple places, right? We don't want the duplicate information, and if we have duplicate information, the maintenance of the code becomes difficult. So that's why we need to use the concept of inheritance. And one more important concept of inheritance or use of inheritance is that generalization of information is possible. So because of generalization, you can avoid the duplication of information. Okay. Now, for example, you can consider these two statements written here. Dogs chase cats, right? Then second, cats chase mice. So in this case, these are the generic information. Then in this case, we need not have to represent the information saying that Fido chases Fang. So we need not have to say Fido is of type dog and Fang is of type cat. So when we are saying dogs chase cats, we need not have to say Fido chases Fang. Okay. Why? Because the statement dogs chase cats, here we are representing the generic information. Now if you want to represent Fido chases Fang, then you need to create the instance of dogs and you need to create the instance of cats. Okay. Similarly, cats chase mice. So you do not have to write a statement here that Fang chases mice. Okay. You just create an instance for cats class and that will take care of the information. Okay. So this is how the information is represented in object-oriented programming. So note here that these are generic statements. These are real-world scenario statements. Now you have converted them to object-oriented programming. Okay. So when you use the concept of classes or when you use the concept of structures in C programming language, you are actually working on the knowledge representation. Okay. So correct knowledge representation will save you a lot of work. Now here also there is one more example. So you can see here there are three statements. One is mammals breathe, second one is dogs are mammals, and third one is cats are mammals. Then in this case we need not have to represent a special statement saying that dogs breathe and cats breathe. Okay, because that information is inherited when we say dogs are mammals and cats are mammals. So here mammals will be a superclass and dogs and cats will be the subclasses. So as I have told you in the previous class that most generic information will be placed in the superclasses. And as you go down the hierarchy, as you go on representing the subclasses, you are moving towards specific information. Now similarly, here there is one more statement, mammals have four legs. Now four legs is a property which you need to represent in mammals class. Right? You need not have to represent it separately in subclasses like dogs or cats. Okay? So it's a generic information. It's a generic information which you need to represent in the superclass. Okay. Now, you can make an assumption that mammals will be having four legs, so you can have a default value. So it is always better to have a default value, but note here that always this default value has to be overridden. You cannot make it compulsory, you cannot make it mandatory, or you cannot lock that value. Okay? Always have a default value. That's good. Whenever you are creating the variable inside the class or inside the structure, but make it overridden. Okay. That means in subclasses, depending on the situation, your program must allow me to override that value. Now, for example, you can see here in this frame, so we have a frame called as mammal, and the slot is number of legs, and the slot value is 4. Now, note here that the number of legs has been marked as star. So, star means it's a default value. Now, but the problem here is if some mammal, say for example, Fido, right? Fido might have an accident, so it might have met an accident and it has lost one leg. Now it has got only 3 legs. Okay, that's a different scenario, but you need to allow the possibility. And sometimes it also happens that there may be problems at the birth. Okay. Some mammal may born with only 2 legs, or it may born with only 1 leg or 3 legs. So that's a possibility. So that's why whenever you are creating the values or whenever you are including the values in the superclass, include those values in the superclass. But the thing is, you can make it default and assign some value, but make it a point that that value has to be overridden, or it can be overridden in the subclasses. Now you can observe the next values in the frames. So you can see here we have 2 more frames. One is dog and second one is cat, and both are of type subclass. Okay, that means we are saying that they are inheriting the mammal class. You can also observe that in slot value. We are saying that dog is a subclass of mammal, cat is a subclass of mammal. Okay, slot is a subclass, mammal is a slot value. Then similarly, Fido is a dog, that's a easy relationship. The next, Fido, you have number of legs, so you can see here in Fido class we have overridden the value. Now in the superclass mammal we have 4 legs, that's a default value, but now you can see the value for number of legs in Fido frame, we have only 3 value. The value is 3. That means we have overridden the value 4. The next fang is a cat. So similarly you can have other properties. But this is the important guideline. So you create a superclass. Inside a superclass have a members and assign default values to them. But those values can be overridden in the subclasses. So that's a feature you need to allow. Now next important thing is you can have frames as slots. Okay, that means in a slot you can have an entire frame. For example, you can see here earlier we had slot as number of legs, but now in this table we are having number of legs as the frames. Okay, this is something the containment. So class inside a class or structure inside a structure, kind of a concept here. Now when we make a slot as a frame, that is we have made number of legs slot as number of legs frame. Now we need to have different slots. So we have created 2 slots. One is minimum value and maximum value. And the minimum value is set for 1 and maximum value is set for 4. So can anybody tell what is the advantage of specifying the ranges clearly? You can post your message in the chat box. What is the advantage of having the ranges like minimum value and the maximum value? Faraj is saying that range helps to increase accuracy. Okay. Any other answer? So the advantage of having range of values is that you can avoid accessing unnecessary values, or you can avoid accessing values outside the range. For example, when you specify minimum value and a maximum value, you can avoid accessing the values 0 or negative values, or you can avoid accessing the values beyond value 4. Okay, because what happens when you mention minimum value and maximum value, you will be putting exceptional cases, you will be putting the test cases to accept the values only within this range. Okay, if you are if somebody tries to enter the values beyond the range, then it will raise an exception and that will be handled. So the advantage is that you can avoid accessing the values beyond range, and when you avoid that, you can avoid the unexpected behavior of an application. Now, when you have slots as frames, one more advantage is that inverse relationship is possible. For example, when we say there's a relationship called as chases, then you can convert it into chased by slot. So that is possible. For example, when you have an active case, you can convert it into, when you have active voice, you can convert it into passive voice. Okay. For example, when I say Fido chases Fang, I can also say that Fang is chased by Fido. So inverse relationship is possible. Now note here that when you are given with a problem statement, and if there are some statements which are expressed in passive voice, okay, then you can convert it into active voice and draw the appropriate semantic net and draw the appropriate frames. Now next concept is multiple inheritance. So we have already discussed the concept of multiple inheritance in the previous class. That is, you can inherit the contents from two superclasses into one subclass. So this results into depth of diamond problem, as we have discussed. That is because when you inherit the information from two superclasses into one subclass, it may result into conflict of information, because it may be possible that both the superclasses may have some common properties with different values. Okay, so when these properties are inherited into single subclass, it will create a conflict, and it is known as depth of diamond problem. So as we have discussed in the earlier class, in C++ we have this problem, but I don't know what they have done with the recent versions of C++, we need to check. But in case of Java, they have introduced the concept of interfaces. So where one superclass will be a class and another one will be an interface. So similarly, you have some different concept with respect to C# as we have discussed in the previous class. So that is cross-language inheritance concept is there. I want to find a cluster that represents between 25 to 30 So you can consider this example. So there is one frame called as cheese, and it is saying that it is representing the information that cheese is smelly. Whereas there is another frame that is known as thing wrapped in foil, and it is saying that cheese is not smelly, or the things which are wrapped in foil are not smelly. But if cheese is wrapped in a foil, then then there will be conflict of information. For example, when you have another frame called as cheddar, then you are saying that cheddar is a cheese. When I am saying that cheddar is a cheese, I am saying that cheese is smelly. I am saying that cheddar is smelly. But at the same time, I am saying that cheddar is the thing wrapped in foil. Then that means I am saying that cheddar is not smelly. Okay. So this is the problem with multiple inheritance. So conflict of information is the major problem. So when there is a conflict, then obviously there has to be some conflict resolution mechanism. So different languages offer different conflict resolution mechanisms. So one we have already discussed with respect to Java. So Java handles it with the help of interfaces. But if you don't have the concept of interfaces, then what you can do is whenever there is a conflict occurs, you can assign a priority based on the application and select the one, or you can simply go by first come first serve basis. So that is the statement which is, or the property which is inherited first, that will be kept, or the property which is inherited last, that will be kept. So you can make some kind of policy, and you can have a conflict resolution mechanism. Now the next concept is procedures. Now note here that it's a term, it's a generic term, but different programming languages have different terms to mean the same thing. For example, procedures term is used in case of Visual Basic or Visual Basic .NET, or even case of Oracle. If you are writing a PLSQL program, so the term used is procedures. Then if you are using the C programming language or C++, okay, we'll consider only functional languages. So when we consider language like C, then it is referred as functions. And when we refer the object-oriented programming languages like C++ or Java, then they are called as methods. But methods, procedures, functions, all these mean the same thing. So frames also have methods with them, and these are called as procedures. Okay. So methods or functions in frames are known as procedures. And procedures associated with frames are also called as procedural attachments. This is another term which is used in place of procedures. Now, what is a procedure? Procedure is nothing but it's a set of instruction associated with a frame that can be executed on a request. So this is exactly what happens when you call a method on an object using the instance, and this is what it happens when you invoke any function. Okay, so procedure, function, or method. So they are nothing but they are just a set of instructions associated with something. So in this case, you can consider them as frame, and they will be executed on request. Okay. Now there are some methods associated with the frames. They are known as slot reader and slot writer. So slot reader, what it does is it reads the value from the frame. Okay, it gets the value from the frame. It is just read-only property. Whereas the slot writer, it is write-only property. So there is also a concept called as instance constructor associated with frames. So what it does is it creates the instance of a class. Say for example, if there is a dog, and when you say instance constructor of dog, it will create an object Fido. Now, now these functions or these procedures are executed on demand. So because of this, they are also called as when needed procedures. So whenever there is a need, you call these procedures. You invoke these procedures. Now, demands. So daemon or daemon is a particular type of procedure that is run automatically whenever a particular value changes or when particular event occurs. Now note here that in case of these daemons, there is some triggering activity which is invoking a function. You are not invoking these uh, daemons or daemon procedures manually. Okay, so these will be invoked whenever some event happens. So those events are whenever a value changes or whenever a user performs some action. Now, there are procedures. For example, there is a procedure called as when read procedure. So it will be executed whenever some some function or some value of a slot has been read by a system. So in order to perform some complex calculations, you need to read the values from the slots. So whenever you read the values, when read procedure will be invoked. So example is that in a bank, you usually have a large financial system with large number of slot values to be read. So it is not necessary to read each and every value. So you can just read the value whenever some changes occur. For example, whenever someone requests the balance of their account, balance amount of in their account. So it is just a read operation. So in these cases, when read procedure will be called. Then similarly, when change procedure. So when change procedure, when someone withdraws the money or when someone deposits the money, right? So in that case, when change procedures will be invoked. Again, you did not have to perform or you do not have to execute when change procedures or when return procedures on all the accounts. So sometimes it also happens that most of the banks they provide some interest, they deposit some interest over the balance amount in your account, right? So that is deposited quarterly. So note here that not all accounts will be updated at a time. So it depends on when you have deposited the amount, when you have opened the account, and so many other factors. Then I have also said that whenever you are defining the range, right, you can avoid accessing or entering values beyond that range, right? So similarly here we have defined a property called as number of legs, where we have defined the minimum value as 1 and maximum value as 4. Now if you try to access the value which is beyond 1 and 4 or between 1 and 4, that is if you try to access value 7 or if you try to enter value 0, then when change procedure will be called and it will display the error message saying that this value should not be entered, enter a value between 1 and 4. Yeah, so you can see here this is a simple function to find the slot value. Slot value in the frame. Now it is also possible to combine frames with rules. So whenever you define rules, you are actually building a pattern matching system or a rule based system which is very much valid whenever you are building expert systems. So your expert systems depends highly on rules. So in this case, you can go for when needed procedures. Now the next concept is representational adequacy. So you can see the statement here. So the statement says that all dogs are mammals. Okay. So for all x, that's the quantifier which is used. Universal quantifier, that is for all. There's another quantifier called as there exists, or you can call it as existential quantifier. So here in this case, we have used universal quantifier. That means for all. So this statement says that all dogs are mammals. Or if you want to read it formally, then you have to read it as for all x's. If x is a dog, then x is a mammal. Okay. This is a formal representation. But if you want to just represent it in English, then you can simply say that all dogs are mammals. So this is done using predicate logic. Okay. So here dog is a predicate, mammal is a predicate, and arrow whatever is mentioned here, that's a relationship. Now you can also say that dog is a subset of mammal. So it is possible to represent such things only in first order predicate logic. Now note here that when we represent such statements, for example, dog is a subset of mammal, the reverse is not true. We cannot say that mammal is a subset of dog. So reverse meaning is not possible in case of first order predicate logic, and that's an advantage. So the advantage is that you cannot represent negativity so easily using frames concept, but you can represent that using predicate logic. It is possible because you have got some operators here. So the advantage here is that first order predicate logic has a greater representational adequacy than frame based representation. That is because you cannot represent negative statements in frames, whereas you can represent negative statements in representational adequacy, or you can represent them in first order predicate logic. So the advantage over frame based systems in predicate logic is that you can represent negative statements. But if you consider frame-based representations, they also have some advantages over first-order predicate logic. Okay, so that means the concept of object-oriented programming can be efficiently represented in frame-based representations. For example, overriding. Right, that's an important feature of object-oriented programming. So that can be effectively implemented and effectively represented using frame-based representations. So the meaning is that both first-order predicate logic and frame-based representations both have their own advantages and disadvantages. So each one will be preferred based on the requirement. Okay, so if you have more requirement towards object oriented programming, then you should choose frames or semantic nets. Otherwise, if you want more representational adequacy, that is, you are representing the negative statements, then in that case, it is better to go for first order predicate logic. So it depends on what kind of information you are interested to represent. The next concept is object-oriented programming. So we can cover it in the next class. So thank you everyone.